Good morning to our Quad City Chamber members. Thank you for joining us on this Friday. It's a perfect day for a Zoom meeting, don't you think? With whatever Mother Nature has decided to dish to us outside, whether that's snow or sleet or rain, it's great to be in here on a Friday and hop on a webinar and learn more about what's going on in your government at the state level, both in Iowa and Illinois. As we kick off this morning, we want to start by thanking our sponsors, AM General LLC, Arconic Incorporated, Constellation, Iowa Solar, and Stanley Consultants. Thank you all for making today happen. We're going to have a good day. So our legislative event series isn't done quite yet. You can join us next Tuesday, which is April 12th. Senator Chuck Grassley is going to be in town, and he offered to talk to our members. So we took him up on that offer. That's going to be at 3:45 at the Rhythm City Casino, and you can register today for that event online. Then on April 22nd, we're going to have Matt Herman. He's joining us from the Roosevelt Group. He'll be speaking on the Rock Island Defense Alliance, and that is a virtual event that will start at 8:30. You may also register for that one online. So today, all of you get to meet the insiders. Joining us are the lobbyists for the Quad City Chambers, who Rachel and I work closely with. And it's exciting because to have you meet them, because we work with them all the time. So we communicate constantly. They're constantly giving us email updates. And if we're not clear on something, we can reach out to them as well. But now you get to meet them today. And that's what we're excited about. Today's program is being recorded and it's available on the Chamber's website after the event. You can also find a full list of our 2022 advocacy priorities on the Chamber's website, and many of these topics you will hear about today have been constantly updated on our Advocacy Center page, thanks to Rachel. So as we're getting started, please enter your questions for our panelists in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. We will address as many of these questions as possible during the program. We're going to kick it off today with State of Illinois lobbyist Matt Hughes. He is the president of MRH Solutions. With his previous experience working for IDOT, Matt has a deep understanding of Illinois government operations and of the policy environment. He serves as a consultant on both the legislative and executive branches of the government, and we're excited to have you with us today, Matt. Thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to hearing from your updates and insights. At this time, I'm going to turn the program over to you.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Things are happening and happened late yesterday in Illinois. What I'm about to propose or present is what came together yesterday. The state now has an agreed budget, and the governor they'll be passing it today, and the governor will be signing it. So, Governor Pritzker came out with an initial $45.4 billion spending proposal in February, including $1 billion in temporary tax cuts. Last week, the Illinois Senate then independently introduced its own plan that included $1.8 billion in temporary tax cuts. And yesterday, the House also followed up with its own budget plan, which split the difference on those temporary tax cuts at about $1.38 billion. Late yesterday, as I mentioned, Governor Pritzker, Senate President Harman, Speaker of the House Welch all announced a deal for fiscal year 2023. As I said, scheduled adjournment is today, and a vote to approve the budget will take place. This, of course, it's noteworthy that, as we all know, this is an election year, and the Illinois primary election has been pushed back to June 28th this year, which is the reason behind the early adjournment of session. What we know that this is an election year, like I mentioned, and the budget is primarily a Democrat proposal, and it will probably reflect that in the roll call when it's voted on. I have some details. We know that it's a $45.6 billion plan for spending, $1.83 billion in tax relief for working families, which includes suspending the tax on groceries for 1 year, which saves consumers $400 million. They will freeze the motor fuel tax for 6 months, saving consumers $70 million. Double the property tax rebate to up to $300 per household. Permanently expand the earned income tax credit, putting $100 million a year back into the pockets of working families. Again, this is from a press release, so bear with me on some of the verbiage, but I wanted to give you the numbers. The budget will provide direct checks to working families with income limits of $200,000 for individuals and $400,000 for joint filers, including $50 per individual and $100 per child, up to 3 children per family. Also, a back to school tax relief for families and teachers, which saves $50 million according to their proposal. Also, a $1.2 billion plan for long-term fiscal stability. It builds on a $4.1 billion in debt paydown, which I mentioned in a coming piece of legislation that's business friendly. It includes a $1 billion budget stabilization fund. Also includes an additional $200 million pension payment, bringing the total pension payment over what is required to $500 million and saving taxpayers more than $1.8 billion. These measures are in addition to the debt payment outlined in Senate Bill 2803, which I'll speak about later. This includes $230 million for College Illinois and $898 million for group health insurance backlog. There are also a public safety component to this budget. According to the press release yesterday from the deal, it invests more than $200 million on top of what the governor's original proposed budget was to support public safety measures by investing in tools law enforcement needs to prevent and solve crimes and strengthen investments in violent prevention programs that keep communities safe. And as I mentioned, and I'll repeat it again, we're all painfully aware that this is an election year. And as a result, the budget will most likely pass with little or no support from Republicans in either chamber. Although the tax cuts are generally supported, the criticism from the Republican caucus in the House and the Senate are centered around the fact that the tax relief being proposed is temporary and not permanent. Some of the things you'll be hearing about this year when the session adjourns are things not typically associated with Illinois budgets. Things like tax cuts, surpluses, significant debt reductions, and bill backlogs being drastically reduced, and something called a rainy day fund, which we're not necessarily used to here in Illinois. Again, it's election year, but our Illinois' notorious fiscal condition is in fact improving. However, those improvements are primarily driven by revenue increases on the state side, marijuana and gaming being one source, and a large temporary influx of revenue attributed to federal COVID relief funds like ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act, and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. One of the significant, I believe, business-related pieces of legislation is Senate Bill 2803, which I mentioned earlier. It involves the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund debt reduction. It was passed on March 24th and signed by Governor Pritzker on March 25th, the very next day. So along parting lines, with both the House and the Senate passed this legislation to partially pay down the state's unemployment insurance trust fund debt. The governor supported the legislation, as I mentioned, and signed it immediately. The total debt obligation in the unemployment insurance trust fund is $4.5 billion, and the amount paid of that debt amounted to $2.7 billion. So that legislation also allocates $898 million in unpaid group health insurance bills, $280 million to unfunded liabilities to College Illinois, and $300 million to pay down the state's pension liabilities beyond what is statutorily required. The funding source for the debt service was federal money made available by the American Rescue Plan Act passed by Congress in 2021, which what happened was basically COVID shutdowns. Most states had to borrow money from the federal government due to unprecedented rise in unemployment benefits applications, and states didn't have the cash on hand to meet that demand. In general, business groups were generally upbeat after this bill passed. A joint statement called the legislation a positive step forward towards addressing the massive shortfall in the trust fund. Supportive comments came from the Illinois Retail Merchants Association, Illinois Manufacturers Association, the Illinois Chamber of Commerce, Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce, and the National Federation of Independent Businesses of Illinois. So the thinking here is that they won't have to raise rates on employers, and they have paid down a significant obligation of debt. And that's all I have about the budget coming together.
Thank you, Matt. That is wonderful news, at least to try to get a budget through this year. We appreciate that. We're going to be asking you some more questions in just a little bit. Right now, we're going to introduce Dustin Miller. He is our state of Iowa lobbyist for the Quad Cities Chamber. Dustin is an attorney with Nyemaster Good Law Firm and the executive director of the Iowa Chamber Alliance, of which we are members. As legislative counsel, Dustin primarily represents Iowa-based associations as a lobbyist at the Iowa legislature and with agencies of the state of Iowa. His work involves a wide range of public policy issues such as water quality, environmental issues, economic development, taxation, public finance, and utilities. Whew, quite a list, Dustin. You have your plate full. How are you this morning?
I am great. Thanks for having me.
You bet. We're thrilled to have you here this morning. Let's turn it over to you. What's happening in the state of Iowa?
Yeah, the state of Iowa, the great news for us is we managed through COVID really well from a financial position. And in 2021, Iowa's, what we did learn in this year through, as Matt mentioned, on the election side and redistricting, Iowa remains to be a pretty slow growth population state. So in 2021, one of the things that we did use that strong position to do is try and impact kind of talent attraction, whether it's workforce housing tax credits, additional money. This is in 2021, not necessarily this session, and impacting childcare. But we went into this session in 2022 with nearly $1 billion in surplus from the previous budget and $1 billion in reserves, which allowed, as you can imagine, in our 6th year of a Republican trifecta, the ability to take a pretty strong swipe at tax reform in this state. Prior to Governor Reynolds becoming governor, taking over for Governor Terry Branstad, Iowa actually ranked 46th in the country for overall tax climate, according to the Tax Foundation. This year in particular, there were tax reforms done in 2018 and last year in 2021. However, this year was a really bold step on behalf of the governor. And one of the things that was really problematic from a business standpoint was prior to 2018 was our 12% corporate rate, which was tied for the highest in the country. And one of the things, stump speeches, I typically say from the Iowa Chamber Alliance is, Iowa's rate, top marginal rate for corporate was 12%, but give me the next 3 hours and I'll explain to you how the effective rate is much lower. And we lost businesses and lost opportunities because of those high numbers. And I think one of the things lost too in this is prior to 2018, we had 9 separate brackets for the personal income tax and 4 separate brackets for corporate. So not only were we a very high rate on the personal and corporate side of income, but we were a very complex system. This session, a tax reform was done very early on in the session, in fact, signed on March 1st, where we eventually will get to a 3.9% personal income tax rate, which will put us at 10th in the country, and eventually a 5.5%. And the way the 5.5% corporate will work is they will assume $700 million in budgeting for every year received from corporate income. Any overage of that will be used to buy down the rate till we get to a 5.5%. Now all of a sudden, a state that was highly complex and high rate, we will now be dropped from 46th in the country in 2018 down to 15th in the country when fully implemented. In addition to that, one of the things that we use to offset a high tax rate system was a research and activities credit, which was far more robust than any other state in the country and actually led to investment, especially on engineers and research. They did make changes to that, but rather than it being a way to help people with a high rate system, this now becomes a new incentive for particular investment. And there's a number of companies around the state, and this impacts you there locally with a number of employers. But that becomes the ability to ratchet that corporate rate down to. In addition to these changes, we also have exempted the majority of retirement income in this state. Hopefully, now our tax climate, which we all know from a business standpoint, isn't the only factor in people making decisions about expansion and retention. However, now it's a very attractive tax climate for people to make those investments. From a talent attraction standpoint, one of the things that we were pushing for was something related to placemaking, something that you guys in the Quad Cities have really been on the forefront of reimagining places and where people want to live, work, and play. While the legislative session didn't see money, just this week we saw an announcement from Governor Reynolds to spend $100 million on quality of life initiatives related to placemaking. I'm really jealous of Matt to be done today. As I said before you all jumped on, we're looking for a number of more weeks to be in the session. The remaining issue is a budget. So while Matt enjoys a Democratic trifecta, in Iowa, we are in our 6th year of a Republican trifecta. That will, take us a number of time. Take us some time to get through just because a disagreement on how the budget gets put together. Some of the other remaining issues of note for people is school choice. That's something that is a priority of the Senate that they're trying to work with the House to get through, and has been a priority of the governor. And I'd be remiss without mentioning, as Matt talked about, unemployment insurance. For the Chamber Alliance in particular, where we get to hear from all the chambers across the state, unemployment insurance was never on our radar until the 2020 with the pandemic. We are pretty shored up and don't have as many issues, but there are changes that we're looking at, especially from a legal standpoint, to make some certainty related to unemployment insurance. The last remaining issue that I think people are going to work through is we're going to have a tax 2.0 bill that'll be focused on sales tax. And that will be one of those issues that'll get put together here in the end. But I would anticipate us being here, the Iowa legislative session being in session at least until the end of April, maybe early May.
Thank you so much, Dustin. Matt, we're going to bring you back into the fold here as well. And we're going to kind of start a discussion here amongst ourselves, but I do want to acknowledge a question first that we have from one of our members. So I'd like to answer those questions first, if possible. And then if we have time, all of us can chat. We have John from Arconic reaching out, and he has a very great question. Dustin, this is going to go towards you. He says a change to the bottle bill, HF 2571, he even knows the numbers, awesome, was set for debate on Wednesday and it didn't happen. Arconic is opposed to changes that will reduce Iowa's recycling rate, and we are registered against the bill. Why did the bill get pulled? And what's going on behind the scenes on this legislation?
Well, I also serve as the Iowa Business Energy Coalition Executive Director, so I'm not going to accept any questions from John Riches. Just joking. John, if you didn't know as well, I also represent the grocers. I'm heavily involved in the bottle bill. That bill, the parties in particular that are of interest in that are related to beer distributors, soda distributors, and grocers, and they are very close to getting a deal done. I would say with what you're seeing in the newspapers or what you're seeing, in bill form, I wouldn't look at that from a, what will impact recycling, because what I would tell you is from a grocer's perspective, we ran the numbers of 2019, even pre-COVID. Grocers, based upon what they're selling versus what they're redeeming currently in the state of Iowa, is less than 15%. So I think there's a misnomer out there that the system is robust and working heavily. And honestly, the system doesn't work heavily because there's a number of people who have never been compliant that sell covered beverages. I think there's an assumption that only grocery stores and clearly Hy-Vee, Fairway, and Walmart have really borne the brunt and burden of this for 43 years. That's how old I am. That's when this was implemented. But really, they're seeing competitors move in across the street from them who aren't compliant and have never been compliant. So I think that's really the discussion, John, is where is the most, and you could imagine too, when this bill was put in place in the late 70s, you didn't have robust recycling systems. And if you couldn't tell, John, I'm deep in the matrix on this thing. You didn't have robust recycling systems. And really what impacts recycling is education. And I think, what we're trying to get to is, where does it make the most sense to change this? Since the bill's been passed, the beer distributors have supposed to put redemption centers in every county seat. They've never been compliant on that. If you had redemption centers in every county seat, would that make more sense? That's really the discussion as to where should you take this refuse and try and get more aluminum back to you, really.
And John did follow up a little bit, but he said, and he is thanking you very much. He says, but the only recycling center in Scott County will not be good for this system. We would agree with that. Yeah. What do you think, Dustin?
I think it won't just be one. I think that there's also an opportunity. The handling fee hasn't been increased since 1979, and it goes from 1 cent to 3 cents. And there's going to be more opportunities, especially on the beer distributor and the soda distributor side. They're going to look at more mobile units. That
Okay.
The mobile units would then be processed by a redemption center.
Got it. Thanks, Dustin, for following up with us on that. And John, thank you for your question. If any of our other members have questions, go ahead and enter them now. We'll be glad to take them. Matt, we're going to shift gears back to you. You were talking about that Illinois Unemployment Tax Fund, and it is good to hear that some portion is getting paid off. We do wish we would have seen it all get paid off. What's going to happen with the portion that did not get paid off? Are businesses going to feel that impact?
Well, I think that's what they're speaking to, is that the businesses won't feel the impact because of the debt service that they've made to the amount. They didn't want to pay the whole thing off. I think they used ARPA money to do a lot of this. So as far as what's going to take place, I expect that, given the fact that this is election year budget and everything's rosy right now, I suppose there'll be some cleanup probably in the fall when things materialize that maybe it isn't as rosy as they maybe presented us. But like I said, I believe it'll continue to be an issue, and I think there's a commitment by the four chambers to make those reductions.
Excellent.
It is good to be talking about debt reduction and surpluses and things like that in Illinois. I think I don't want to be negative or pessimistic. I think we ought to, all as taxpayers on this side of the river, be thankful that at least we seem to be making some progress.
Agree. And as a taxpayer on that side of the river, I agree. That's been pretty fantastic. You've spoken a little bit or alluded to the elections coming up. With the redistricting, how do you foresee the elections playing out this fall?
Well, unfortunately, I only see probably a handful of competitive races in the Senate and the House. That's the unfortunate part of things, as far as whether we have actual competitive districts. I think the unfortunate other downside is that this divide between downstate moderate politics of both flavors and Chicago progressive, I think that chasm only deepens a bit with the way these maps were drawn. And of course, Illinois loses a congressional seat or two, and those aren't good things for representation. Exactly.
Completely agree to that. And if anybody hasn't looked at that redistricting map yet, they should. It's absolutely crazy. I've never seen lines go in so many directions. I know they're trying to make a method to their madness, but it's not really working well. We'll see how it happens this fall. We'll see how that goes. Dustin, back to you for a minute. What issues remain in order for the session to close this year in Iowa?
Yeah, I think that, as I mentioned at the end, the biggest issues are school choice. I think that's a remaining issue. But the number one is the budget. The House came out with their own individual, and thankfully you have the great Representative Grandpa Gary Moore there locally as your appropriations chair. There's just a differing priorities between the two chambers, and it will take a little bit of time to put that together. To go back to Matt's, the question you had for Matt on redistricting, the way I see it playing out in our state is, to his point, the districts that are twingy or could flip are very small. Obviously, midterm elections for a presidential midterm are always favor the party out of power. So I don't anticipate that our current Republican trifecta would go away. If anything, we might see seat increases in our majorities.
Fantastic. Matt, in the state of Illinois, what are you seeing, or what do you think has happened already that's had the biggest impact on businesses so far?
Well, I do think that the debt reduction and the bill paying and the bill backlogs being addressed, I mean, I think everybody can be appreciative of that. Now, you could argue and go back and forth on the fact that increases in revenues led to those improvements, and those aren't good things, but at least with it, we can say that the state is paying our bills and we don't have a bill backlog. You know, conditions are improving. I think we got to ride out this election cycle, let the dust settle, and then probably in the spring you'll see, fall in the spring you'll see some more, I guess, substantive legislative matters come to the forefront. I hate to do that, like everything circles around this, or everything revolves around this election, but that's just the reality of what we're dealing with. Nobody's particularly brave during an election year, so that's why the election drove the early adjournment here in Illinois. But the reality is they didn't want to be here in town anyway because they didn't want to be voting on controversial things. So I would say to the business community, things are improving. You can be hopeful. However, not much, this is an election year, and that's very much reflected in this budget. The difference I see is the tax cuts and tax discussions that Dustin is having are more about corporations and employers. And in Illinois, it's more about getting it to families and working people from those are the two lenses we're looking at this from.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Hi, Jim. Good morning. Jim Hughescamp has a question for us this morning, and he says it's for everyone, so it's for both of you. In regards to people paying taxes and creating more revenue to keep us safe, educate children, and bring more fiscal stability, will there ever be actual movement to fairly tax credit unions who now pay no federal or state income taxes like the rest of us have to?
Yeah, I can answer that, Rhonda.
Okay, thanks.
Interestingly enough, that's actually one of the components of kind of what we're calling our tax 2.0, the sales tax bill that would come behind our income tax. As you can imagine, Jim, it's very challenging to try and institute a new tax, especially in a Republican trifecta environment. The way of getting around that or impacting that positively is actually a reduction in franchise tax for the banks. That's the way the Senate is approaching it, and that remains in the mix for the end of session. Similarly, we have other things in that tax 2.0 related to, per capita, Iowa has become, the nation's leader in the insurance and financial industry, and there's a reduction in the insurance premium tax too. So all of this is to try and make parity or make a better system amongst similarly situated. But yeah, as you can imagine, full on taxing, there's been an effort from the banks to do that for a number of years. In Iowa, what we're going to try and do is rather reduce the taxes on the banks.
Perfect. And just so both of you know, Jim is with Blackhawk Bank and Trust here in the area, and he attends our legislative series quite regularly. So he's pretty up to date on what's going on and privy to information. So we appreciate you answering this question.
I got the sense he might work for a bank.
Good sense, Matt. That was wonderful. And he's just an all-around great guy too. So that's great also. I want to remind our viewers today that they can still type in a question or two. We just have a few minutes left here, so they're welcome to type in and ask a question, just as we've had going on this morning. Which legislation will have the largest impact on the community in 2022? And maybe we haven't even seen it yet. Maybe it's not going to happen until the fall. But this is to either one of you. Which do you think will have the largest impact on the community, the business community?
I think, for me, unequivocally, it's this tax reform bill where, we're already seeing lots of articles, whether it's in the Wall Street Journal or the National Review, of envious folks of, at least from a tax claim standpoint, it's pretty tough not to see the movement. And the criticism of that will be, does that, when you see a downturn and you're ratcheting these rates down, Will the budget take an impact in the future? Well, that remains to be seen. But I think ultimately what we hope that this does is creates an environment where we will see more investment. So that's unequivocally for us the biggest business benefit this session.
Fantastic.
I guess in Illinois, I sound like a broken record, but just the fact that Illinois is making progress on their financial situation is probably what I would tell the business community to be hopeful and optimistic about, and that the conditions are improving. I know that there's probably going to be an edge rewrite. There'll be a focus on economic development. I know that placemaking is also a big priority for the governor of Illinois, but elections are not necessarily getting in the way. They're just pushing back some significant reforms in Illinois that I think are on the horizon once the dust settles with the election.
Absolutely agree. And you both have mentioned placemaking today, and that is so driven here in our region. We have people with the Downtown Davenport Partnership, people working in Rock Island, people all over the Quad Cities, East Moline. And that is a wonderful way to draw people to our community. So when we talk about placemaking, there's so many factors that go into that. And if you want to learn more, please go to our website because we have that articulated there as well. Gentlemen, we want to thank you for joining us today. It's just been a wonderful morning to have you both here, and we look forward to talking to you again in the fall. We want to wrap up today by thanking our sponsors, AM General LLC, Arconic, Constellation, Quad Cities Nuclear, formerly Exelon, Iowa Solar, and Stanley Consultants. We hope you all have a great Friday and a good weekend.